Hello, you beautiful and awesome viewers of mine. Arlo here, and today we're reviewing Splatoon 2. As I've said many a time, the first game was probably the freshest thing to hit the Wii U, though there was a lot of room for improvement. So, will the sequel swim or sink? Will it float or flounder? Will it make waves or is it dead in the water? Will it be all fried and crispy and delicious or end up stinking up the trash can? Will it... Well, let's find out. On the surface, Splatoon 2 looks almost like a carbon copy of the first game, especially if you were never really into the scene, or at least haven't been for a good while. I myself didn't stick around for too long after the launch of Splatoon 1, so when I saw the reveal trailer for 2, you might recall that I didn't even know I was looking at a sequel until that big 2 sloshed onto the screen. Both visually and functionally, it's nearly identical. But it's when you sit down with the game and really start to dig in that you see just how different it is, and we'll be discussing those differences throughout this review. First though, I want to talk about that core gameplay, and I touched on this in my first review, but I really can't elaborate on it enough. Splatoon's overall concept is incredible. So many shooters out there have been doing more or less the same things again and again for so many years now, but this is innovation. As I'm playing, it's easy for me to forget or take for granted just how many new gameplay opportunities the whole inking thing has created. In the unlikely chance you are not yet familiar with said thing, the game has you shooting ink, covering the ground as you go, and teams always share the same color. By hitting the left trigger, you can turn into a squid, and in this form, you can enter the ink and swim around with great speed and increased stealth. And you can even move up inked walls. The enemy team has a different color of ink, and touching this causes damage and slows you down to a crawl. Thus, whatever mode you're playing, a major goal is always to lay down as much ink as possible. If a player uses their ink to deal enough damage to an opponent, that opponent will be splatted, and will respawn at his or her base after a set amount of time. It's a very simple system, and its colorful, kid-friendly vibe can be disarming, but don't let all that fool you. It offers a tremendous amount of depth. The fact that ink of two colors is always hitting the map means that the map is always changing. Your ability to move around quickly and easily depends entirely on your team's ink. That means that you're always helping each other, and that every single splash could potentially make all the difference in getting somewhere on time, or escaping a dangerous situation, or flanking an enemy player. Plenty of games use the concept of capturing bases or towers and thus owning a percentage of the map, but now owning the map is built right into the game regardless of what the goal is. And instead of it granting some arbitrary point value toward your victory, it affects your entire team's mobility. It means that getting backed into a corner can be an extra tricky problem because you just can't move around enough to fight back effectively, but it also means that just one person sneaking around the enemy and inking unchecked can turn the whole battle around, especially considering that teammates can jump to each other at any time. This idea that every bit of ink matters and that one person can make all the difference means the game is much more accessible than a lot of other shooters. Traditionally, if you're terrible at shooting and you don't kill anyone, you're nothing but a detriment to your team. But in Splatoon, as long as you're laying down ink, you're doing something. Splatting opponents is great, but even in the off chance a person avoids combat for an entire match, as long as they're inking, they're technically helping. Even shooting at an opponent and missing and getting splatted yourself does something, because all that ink you shot hits somewhere, and that's more ink that counts toward your score, or helps your team get around, or wastes the enemy's time cleaning up. And like I said, if you're off painting somewhere in the corner of a map, you're offering a jumping point for each of your squad mates, which increases your team's mobility even further. The game is also accessible because of how cleverly it avoids violence. Now, I don't personally mind violence in video games, but I can really appreciate how Splatoon opens itself up to basically every person on the planet. You don't shoot bullets, you shoot ink. You don't kill people, you splat them. Most cleverly, though, is how splatting your opponents is never the primary goal, in any mode. There's always some sort of objective, and splatting them simply means that they're no longer in your way, and they have less time and ability to complete the objective themselves. This creates a great sense of competition without making that competition all about who can kill the other person the fastest, who can kill the most people, what weapon is best for killing people. And this is wonderful for me because I'm terrible at splatting, but I'm frequently top inker on my team. Sometimes the other team is laying the smackdown so hard that we need every man on deck fighting back, but sometimes I can stay out of trouble and just ink like crazy behind everyone's backs, and it spells victory for us. Speaking of sneaking and splatting and all that though, so far the stages show a pretty hefty change from the original. Splatoon 1 had a good variety of smaller, tighter stages and big open ones, but Splatoon 2 leans much further on the small, tight side. The stages also offer much less verticality this time around, with only small towers and ledges to climb. This pushes all the players closer together, creating a much more intense and combat-heavy experience. As a person who's not so great at combat, there's obviously a downside to this. When I just can't find my groove, I spend half the game responding, and it can be really frustrating when you just want to get anywhere, but wherever you go, there seem to magically be 2 or 3 opponents ready to splat you. However, there are benefits to this new design. It places a bigger emphasis on skill rather than simple chance. If the map is too big, then no one can really gain the upper hand. Everyone just inks everything like crazy, and at the end you see who inked more. Here it's possible to push the enemy back into their base and keep them there, and when you do that, you really feel like you dominated the map, like you really won. But of course, this opens up your territory to being torn apart if someone manages to slip through the barricade. But then if they do, it doesn't take too long to navigate to the other side of the map to deal with it. Then on top of all that, without so much verticality, weapons are now more balanced. In the past, a really tall central tower meant that the first sniper to get up there was probably going to splat everybody within his or her sights, and it could be really hard to bring that person down. But now there's very little hiding, very little sniping, some for sure, but not too much. Now every weapon type works pretty well on every map, and choosing a weapon is more about fitting your own personal playstyle. And on the subject of weapon balance, this is really where Splatoon 2 towers over its predecessor. Post-launch patches are bringing in small tweaks, but really the new balance is all in the specials. There are 9 special abilities tied to the various weapons, and none of them feel overly powerful. In the first game, there were 2 abilities that granted temporary invincibility, which basically meant that if you got in a firefight and an opponent popped one of them, you were toast. It was a pretty big problem, so it's so awesome to see that the developers recognized the problem and fixed it. A few of these abilities will boost your defense for a short while, but you're never truly invincible. They all offer great utility, but have weaknesses. Every time I start to think that one of them is OP, I realize that I just need to learn how to better deal with it. The Inkjet in particular can turn a player into a killing machine, but only if they know how to use it well, and if the targets just don't know how to run away for a few seconds until it's spent. If there's one special that seems underpowered, it's the Stingray, though it's possible that people just need to get the hang of it. This balancing in both the stages and the weapons makes more of a difference than I can possibly express. These changes are relatively subtle. Again, nothing looks incredibly different on the surface, they're only obvious once you really start playing, but they are complete game changers and major enough that they could have only been implemented in a full sequel with a full weapon and special reset. Balancing the gameplay means that this is a purely superior title to the original. So many of the growing pains have been worked out, and this feels like the Splatoon we were meant to play, the one we'll be playing for years to come. There are other more subtle improvements as well. The graphics have been given a little boost, most noticeably in the resolution department. Inkopolis Square and all the stores and menus and even light gameplay all push full 1080p HD graphics, and it looks lovely. Everything is much smoother on the Switch, and the character models have even gotten slight poly count upgrades if you're into comparing that closely. The thing about the resolution though is that it's dynamic, and this right here is genius. See, the game prioritizes performance, i.e. frame rate, over everything else. When things on the screen get busy, the resolution scales down to keep gameplay running smoothly. This means that when you're in a match, the game stays locked at 60 FPS no matter what. I am baffled by how they were able to pull this off so perfectly. In all my time with the game, I've yet to encounter even one single dropped frame during a match. And on top of that, the resolution might scale down, but it never dips very far, and in the middle of the action, there's no way I can even perceive it happening. The result is a game that looks beautiful and runs perfectly, always. And of course, the beautiful looks aren't just about resolution. Splatoon 2's style is as wonderful as ever. Characters are awesomely designed, the world is colorful and vibrant, the backdrops are amazing, and the ink has a warbly sheen that makes it look straight up like paint. It's surprising how they were able to create a style that appeals to kids without overreaching in their attempt to make it all hip diggity. It's stylish enough that a youngin' can enjoy it, but it has a 90s vibe that pulls in the old fogies like me. That crossover is really impressive to me. There are a number of great hairstyles to choose from now, which helps further set your character apart, and gear once more plays a very large role. For one, it makes you look cool. But of course it grants a bunch of different abilities too. In the first game, a clothing item was granted with new abilities as you leveled it up, but the ability you got was always random in order to keep things balanced. Otherwise, someone would discover the most powerful build and everyone would just do that. This time you can pay to have your gear scrubbed and you get ability chunks in return, and enough chunks will let you put specific abilities onto a piece of gear. This is great because it gives you a little more choosing power when suiting up, but still takes a great deal of patience and dedication to pull off effectively. I feel they've struck a good balance here. It's not all about pure luck and leveling a piece a million times until it's got the perfect ability set, but it's not too easy either. Another simple refinement that just makes the game better. Inkopolis Square and all the shops are mostly the same as they were in the first game, and you can either run around on foot or hop to each store with the touch of a button. One great addition is a truck where you can trade tickets for food that boosts your XP or money gains for a set number of matches, or drinks that increase your chances to roll a specific ability, which of course gives you even more choosing power with your gear. My only problem here is that each item requires a ticket specifically for it, and you can't just plain buy any of them. You've got to earn them by playing certain modes, and the game can be pretty stingy about giving them out. Let's stop beating around the bush and talk about playing online. Of course, you've got your regular turf war where teams fight to lay down the most ink in 3 minutes time. This mode is at the heart of Splatoon, and it's the most accessible for reasons I've already stated. It's not ranked in any way, so unfortunately you never know if the opposing team is going to have a bunch of pro players that wipe the floor with you, or if your team is going to get stuck with the kid sitting on his dad's lap playing a video game for the first time. This randomness can be frustrating because sometimes you feel like you're on fire, but the rest of your team just isn't pulling their weight, or even worse, you find out at the end of a losing match that one of your teammates dropped before it even started. But it's also nice because being matched with anyone and everyone means I can win sometimes. Ranked battles, though, that's a whole different story. Here you're teamed up with players more or less at your skill level, and you compete in 3 different modes, which rotate every few hours. Rainmaker, where you try to plant the titular weapon on your enemy's base, Tower Control, where you claim and escort a tower to your enemy's base, and Splat Zones, where you fight to control territories until your team's count hits 0. These are way more combat intensive and competitive, and thus I'm not particularly good at them, and sometimes feel like it's just waiting to respawn. The game! They're certainly fun though, and a great option for more dedicated players. If I had to pick a favorite, I'd say it was Tower Control. That's the one I tend to do okay at, and I like that there's always one central focus point that moves around independently. New in Splatoon 2 is League Battles, where groups can team up to compete against other groups, and unfortunately I'm not nearly hardcore enough to take part in that sort of thing, but it certainly looks cool, and it's yet another great option to help distract the better players away from turf wars, so I stand more of a chance. All of this is housed in the Inkopolis Tower, which includes an option for joining up with friends, though this is a little bit wonky. It took a lot of trial and error to figure out, as neither game nor any resource online gives any information beyond, you can join with your friends. Basically, you don't have the option to join with a friend unless they're already in a game or in a lobby looking for a match, and if you're getting on at the same time, it's just about impossible to join them fast enough before they get paired with 7 other players and start playing, meaning that whenever I first join, I've got to sit and wait while my friend finishes up. Being joined means that you'll both be stuck in the same lobby as you're looking for a game, though it's a flip of the coin if you're both put on the same team or pitted against each other. It's a little disappointing that my friend and I can't just stick together, but I understand that it helps balance things out, and in fact I found it more fun than I expected to shift from working together to trash-talking each other in a matter of minutes. Again, no thanks to the game, I learned that League Battles are the only way to play with your friends in ranked mode. When a friend is in regular old ranked mode, they're simply not joinable. This is certainly disappointing because jumping in and casually playing Rainmaker with a buddy is very different from committing 2 hours to battling against other teams for points, so this seems like an oversight. At the very least, we should be able to play together if our ranks are close enough. Overall, joining with friends is a great option to have, and being with a friend in the same game makes it way more fun, but they could have made it a little easier and more efficient to stick together. An option to always join friends, or even certain friends when they're on, would be very welcome. My last big review was for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and overall Splatoon's online experience offers quite a bit more depth. However, there's one feature Mario Kart has that I wish so badly was in this game. If you want to get a whole bunch of people together for some karting fun, you can create a tournament that anyone can look up using its code. That way you can play with your buds online without necessarily being Switch friends. But with Splatoon, you're either randomly matched with a person, you're friends with them, or you're sitting right next to them. There's no way to create a room or an event or whatever and share the code with your Twitter buddies, for instance, so that anyone can join and play. That's exactly what I want to do, so I can play with all my fans, but I'm limited to the ones on my already full friends list, and in fact there's no way to alert just those people about a private match I'm hosting, so it's just about impossible to coordinate. It's a relatively small thing in the long run, but man, oh man, I wish they included a code option. Moving on, there's one online mode that's not featured in Inkopolis Tower, and it's without a doubt the most important mode to cover in this review. I'm talking, of course, about Salmon Run, Splatoon's answer to Horde mode and the series' first purely co-op experience. And it is glorious. In Salmon Run, you're grouped with 4 other folks on a small map and assaulted by waves of salmonids. Your task is not only to survive, but to collect special golden eggs from tougher boss salmonids and deliver them to your basket. There are 3 waves with a time limit for each, and if you fail to meet your quota for any wave, or if everyone on your team finds themselves splatted at the same time, you're done. The mode has its own point and ranking system and grants bonuses like money and gear and other stuff that can be used in the main game. The whole thing has this hilarious vibe where everyone thinks it's super sketchy and your unseen boss talks to you through a radio and you put on these long rubber gloves and fight in these nasty locations. It's like working some really dirty job for a shady business, and it adds a humongous amount of charm. Most importantly though, this mode is fun! Ever since it was announced in that Nintendo Direct some time back, I couldn't wait to give it a try, and even after just playing the tutorial level, I was hooked. There's just something so insanely satisfying about splatting all these goopy fish dudes and trying to collect collect as many eggs as possible, and as someone who is, as I mentioned, not super competitive, working together with a team against AI baddies is right up my alley and really rounds out the greater Splatoon experience. It's also fun because it can be really challenging, and going into a run, you never know how things are going to go down. You never know what or how many salmonids you're going to have to take down, and some boss ones are much tougher than others. Sometimes there's fog, and sometimes it's nighttime, and each of these presents new hazards. The tide goes up and down on your small island, and the collection basket can move around, dramatically changing the flow of the run. Enemies come from all sides, so no direction is ever truly safe. Sometimes the onslaught is positively insane, but that just makes victory all the sweeter, especially when you're able to pick up a bunch of extra eggs and boost your rewards. Injecting one more dose of variety, the available weapons rotate and you're randomly assigned one for each wave. This is cool because it forces you to adapt constantly and helps balance out the difficulty, though it can be frustrating when, for instance, the weapon pool is full of rollers, which are nearly worthless against certain salmonids. Steelhead. I've never used Splatoon's in-game communication before. Taking the time to hit the D-pad to give a booyah or two isn't even something I consider most of the time. But Salmon Run's little shouts are not only a fine alternative to voice chat, they're necessary tools for victory. When the team spreads out to ink the ground and wait for the first wave, the guy who spots the first salmonids only has to hit up on the D-pad to alert the others and they all converge on the spot. Whenever you get splatted, a teammate has to ink you to revive you, so the default shout on the D-pad becomes help. This is perfect for an uncoordinated fellow like me who doesn't want to memorize different shouts for different D-pad directions. Whatever situation I'm in, I just hit up and the game knows what I'm trying to communicate. You can play Salmon Run online with friends and it's just as fun as you would expect when you do. My friend and I couldn't seem to simply join each other like we can in Turf Wars, but it was easy to set up a room and let him join, then recruit other players to fill the party with the touch of a button. Not really sure why the same room option isn't available in Turf Wars to make that easier, but hey, whatever. And one more note about the mode, if a player ever gets dropped mid-game, the difficulty scales down so that you're not just left out in the cold with a horde of salmonids you can't deal with. This is really awesome compared to the other modes where a dropped player means victory isn't super likely. Salmon Run's got one ginormous flaw though. It's not available all the time. It's open sporadically, 12 hours here, 24 hours there, something like half the time. Going into this, I wanted to believe that it wouldn't be a big deal, but it kind of is. I sort of get why it's limited. It's a whole new mode in addition to all the other multiplayer modes, so limited availability means there's more of a chance that you'll find people to play with. But I think Nintendo might have underestimated how much we would enjoy Salmon Run, because even just judging by how people are reacting to the limitation online, full-time would not be a problem. We can only keep our fingers crossed and hope that Nintendo changes it, because more often than not, when I've got the time to play, Salmon Run ain't open. Then your bonus points reset between shifts, meaning if you're looking for bonuses, it's not really worth playing unless you can dedicate a good chunk of time to it. A kid during summer vacation isn't going to see it as much of a problem, but I can't always choose exactly when I'm going to play. So now that we've covered all the online modes, let's touch on connection. Much like the game's overall performance, playing online is a very smooth affair, though it's not strictly perfect. Only one time so far I've hit connection issues and been kicked from a game, and one time playing Salmon Run things were a little wonky. My ink took an extra moment to start refilling, golden eggs weren't showing up correctly for me. But those have been very rare exceptions indeed. Getting kicked out of a lobby every once in a while and having to pop back in, or just having to wait a minute or two before finding a match is usually the worst of what I experience. I've only had connection problems consistently on 2 occasions. Once while I was playing at a friend's house and we were trying to join each other using the same internet connection. Once we got in though, things went swimmingly, and really it might have just been a fluke because we had no problem playing separate games. The second occasion was the recent Splatfest, and I heard a lot of people saying they had issues as well. Dropping from a game still never happened, but dropping from lobbies was annoyingly frequent, and my friend even got dropped after a game right before XP was divvied up. Fortunately, Splatfest was only a short event, and we can hope the next one runs a little smoother. Online's great, but it isn't the only way to connect. All the game's multiplayer modes can be played locally using multiple switches. In the case of Salmon Run, this is easy, mainly because you can have as few as 2 players and even set the difficulty. Limited online availability might be frustrating, but local play at least helps alleviate that frustration. You get a fraction of the rewards for playing, and it's not as much fun without 4 people, but I'm really thankful for it. Full Turf War matches are probably amazingly fun to play locally, but I wouldn't know because I doubt I'll ever have 7 friends with Switches and copies of Splatoon and schedules that all line up. I said it in my review of the first game, and I'll say it again. The lack of bots is humongously disappointing. Sure, the AI wouldn't be perfect, but it would allow us to host proper turf wars with any number of players. One person with 3 bots versus another person with 3 bots? That would be so much fun! And the frustrating thing is that bots are technically built into the game. There are octolings that you fight in the single-player campaign that run and shoot ink and all that stuff just like inklings. Then another disappointing thing is the lack of any sort of split screen. Even just allowing 2 players per screen would mean we only needed 4 switches for turf wars, which would be infinitely more manageable. But there's none of that. If you're playing the game, you're playing it on your own Switch with your own copy, period. However, this is all made a little better by the fact that you can indeed enter a match with any number of players, including just 2, which I most certainly did not expect. Obviously, these maps were built for 8 players, but there's some fun to be had with just a handful, so again, the option is very welcome. It's also great that you can play any of the ranked modes locally too. I would love to be able to tweak the rules for each match, though the options here are sadly very basic. Not a huge deal, I guess, I don't know. Despite that and the lack of split screen and bots, local play is still awesome, and maybe someday at a convention or something I'll be able to try out a big turf war. The portable nature of the Switch makes it even possible, whereas the idea of bringing multiple Wii U's together was pretty laughable. As you probably could have expected, connecting switches is easy and performance is flawless. No lag, no dropped frames, nothing. The only problem arises when you're trying to play locally on different TVs, as the systems seem to have a hard time connecting to each other when they're docked. Most local matches are probably going to be played handheld or tabletop style, but for those times when you can bring a bunch of TVs together, this is a little disappointing. I assume the docks are interfering with the signals or something, so it makes me want to get one of those little tiny dockless docks I keep seeing. Connection is much better when you're closer together though, so if you're having problems with this, try scooching a little. The final mode in Splatoon 2 is Octo Valley, the game's single-player campaign. If there was one aspect of Splatoon that I hoped would change more dramatically in the sequel, this was it. Unfortunately though, it's just like the rest of the game, nearly identical on the surface with many tweaks and improvements. And I might as well get the griping out of the way first. Just like the first game, the campaign sees you hired by someone to find and rescue the Zapfishes who have been stolen by the Octarians. There are a handful of worlds with a handful of levels each, which must be found and revealed before you can play them. The levels are linear affairs that mix combat with platforming, and overall there's basically no story beyond the tiny little snippets fed to you between worlds. I'll admit I was hoping for more. The single player in the first game felt a little rushed, a little tacked on. It was tremendously fun and was a highlight for me for sure, but it left so much room for development. Mainly, it just would have been nice to have more of a story with actual characters and events and plot points and maybe even locations with NPCs, I don't know. Not the most complex thing in the world, just something to deepen the Splatoon lore, as it were. But with such a short amount of time to develop the game, Nintendo was apparently happy with just refining what they already had. Griping over though, because it really is a big improvement over the first Octo Valley. It delivers the same fun, frantic level design with all sorts of new mechanics built in that help break up the action. This time you've got a large variety of unique hero weapons at your disposal, and most stages insist that you use one in particular when playing through for the first time. I kept thinking that I should be annoyed by this idea, but the stages are often built around their recommended weapons, so I found the challenge and the constant changes in gameplay fun. It added variety to the campaign and allowed for even more new mechanics. Once you've beaten a level, you can run through it with any weapon you want, and of course this is going to require different strategies. Then once you've beaten every level with a weapon, you can unlock that weapon to use in the main game, which is awesome because hero doolies! The campaign is once again quite short, maybe 5 or 6 hours, but the levels are so fun that grinding for currency to upgrade your equipment is a great time killer, and trying to unlock every weapon obviously multiplies the potential playtime by 9. The whole thing is also chock full of humor, mainly puns that I found to be delightfully horrible, making for a complete package that's constantly enjoyable. There's one more aspect of Splatoon 2 that's been creating some strong reactions, and that's connecting with friends via the Splatnet 2 app in order to voice chat. Unfortunately, I'm not able to comment much on this, as I haven't had a chance to try it out. My tablet's on the fritz, so I can't get the app, I don't have a headset, and to be honest, it sounds like it's really just not worth dealing with. I'm disappointed that Nintendo hasn't provided a better service. If they're gonna do something, they should really do it and do it right, but for me personally, it's not a huge deal. I'm not that into the idea of voice chatting with people whenever I get on, and if I want to play alongside a buddy online, it's so easy to use any number of other means to communicate. If I felt the game required people to coordinate in order to win, I would count this half-hearted voice chat service against it to a much greater degree, but I don't. I wish the app worked better, or better yet, that you could just chat in-game, and I hope they fix this in the future, but it's not enough to bring down my overall opinion too much. Woo! I think that's finally it. Outro time! Splatoon 2 is a phenomenal game. The developers took the first game, which I felt deserved a 5 out of 7, and tweaked and polished until they had something that was darn near perfect. Splatoon 1 felt a little lacking right out of the box and then improved over time with content updates, but this right here feels like a complete game. More weapons and stages will be welcome, but as far as modes go, you couldn't ask for much more than this. There's so much to do and so many ways to play. There's still plenty of room for future growth, particularly in the single-player department, there's no doubting that. Any and all new outlets through which we can get our splat on will always be welcome and even expected. But the great thing is that judging purely by this game's refinements, I have no doubt that the team is already gathering feedback for the next one, and that's a really good feeling. Knowing that they're really listening makes me love the game even more. If Splatoon 2 was just an improved version of the original without a lot of new content, I would have given it a solid 6. But even with its current scheduling issue, Salmon Run is what pushes this title over the edge. It's that extra little bit of oomph Splatoon needed to be a must-have, to be the kind of game I just can not put down. Don't need a Switch yet because Breath of the Wild is on Wii U? Yeah, you're right. Mario Kart 8's on Wii U too? Fine, I get that. But this game makes one heck of a compelling argument for getting a Switch, my friend. You can play Splatoon on the Wii U, sure, but not like this. I give Splatoon 2 a big fat 7 out of 7. Before we go, it's time for an Arlo update. Do you live in or near Northern California? Would you like to chill with a certain blue monster and some other people who happen to be chilling with said blue monster? Well, I'm planning a fan meet and greet / switch party / I'm not exactly sure yet for October. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the first and possibly annual, I don't really know yet. Now, don't let the name fool you. It's probably not going to be a huge event, so don't quit your job to come or anything. I have no idea how many people will even show up, and I don't even know exactly where it is yet. All I've got is the town, Redding, California, and the day, October 7th, and I won't know anything else until I know how many people are interested. That's why I've made an event on Facebook, and you can find the link in the description below. Many apologies if you don't have a Facebook account. This is the only way I could think to do this effectively. But basically, if you're planning on going, you've got to RSVP by September 7th, 1 month before the event. Once I've got a head count, I can look for adequate facilities and start figuring out what the event will even be. Will there be food, henna tattoos, a bearded lady? I just don't know. I know someone who could provide all those things, but airfare for my grandma would be pretty costly. And depending on the size, I might have an Indiegogo campaign or something to help cover the costs. Hey, it could just end up being 15 people and we just do it in the community room at the library. Like, who knows? All I know for sure is that I want to hang with you guys and get my Splatoon on. I want 8-player local turf wars, and I want them bad. And remember, even if you can't go, I'll still be at SAC Gamers Expo in Sacramento this December. So make sure to follow me on Twitter, as that's always the best way to get updates on this kind of stuff, and I'll post updates on the event page too, and maybe in a future video, I'm not sure yet. So I hope to see you there, you have a good one, and you thought you could get away without a Patreon shout-out? Well, not this time, bucko. See those guys up there? They're my top patrons, and coincidentally, each one can knit a pair of wool mittens in 5 minutes flat. If you want to help support my dream of YouTubing full-time, you can hop over to Patreon and get behind-the-scenes updates of what I'm working on for as little as $1 a month. See ya! Arlopalooza! Woo!